Hi, I'm Micah Halpern. Thank you for joining me today as I do some thinking out loud. Our first segment is called Background Briefing. The first thing I've been thinking about is Hassan Rouhani. He recently announced on Iranian TV that the West is trying to exploit the divisions between Shiites and Sunnis. He is 100% correct. For decades, Western leaders muddled in the Middle East, weighing in on internal decision-making with little to no understanding of the Muslim world. For them, an Arab was an Arab. All Arabs were the same. They were all Muslims, and all Muslims were the same. They had no idea that Iranians were Persians, and while they were Muslims, they were definitely not Arabs. They had no idea that not all Arabs spoke the same language, that Farsi, let's say, for instance, is not Arabic, the language spoken in modern-day Persia today. Now, primarily, as a result of the rise of ISIS and the struggle between Iran and Saudi Arabia, Western leaders have an albeit simplistic but relatively clear understanding of the tremendous split in the Arab-Muslim world. They now know that there are Shiites and there are Sunnis, and they are not the same at all. And they understand that the rift between Shiites and Sunnis is far larger and much more intense than the split between Catholics and Protestants in Christianity or Orthodox and Reform in Judaism. Once the light bulb went on, once the realization crystallized, Western leaders realized that they could use the Shiite-Sunni rift to their advantage and hopefully gain an upper hand. They did this by maneuvering to drive their own Western wedge between these already existing rivals, taking advantage of the chasm by manipulating the ages-old rift could very well prove beneficial to their own very Western agendas. And since 9/11, the West has spent trillions of dollars on it. The Shiite-Sunni rift is not about the difference between radical and liberal Muslims. Radicals exist in both camps. It's about Shiite Islam, which emanates from Iran, and Sunni Islam, which is composed of most of the remaining Muslim world. The other Muslim sects are so small they hardly fit into the equation. Shiites compose only about 15% of the Muslims in the world. But with Iran at their helm, it is a very formidable 15%. The other 85% are Sunnis, and Saudi Arabia has claimed the leadership role of that swath of the Muslim world. The battle has been going on for centuries. It dates back to the death of Muhammad and is a struggle over the Prophet's true legacy. Both sides claim to be the rightful heirs, and each views the other as heretics, as deniers of the fundamental principles of Islam. Today, there are 5 places where this proxy conflict between Shiites and Sunnis is being waged. But no matter where the battles are waged, the true war is between Iran on one side and Saudi Arabia on the other. The conflict is far greater and far deeper than land and control. It's about regional hegemony and a history of conflict that dates back to the rise of Islam, fought in Iraq and in Syria and in Lebanon and in Yemen and in Bahrain. Rouhani's thesis that the West is trying to exploit the divisions is his attempt to unite these warring and desperate Muslim sects. His thinking, which is again 100% correct, is that if they unite, they will be able to repel the West. Islam composes about 22% of the 7 billion people on Earth. That puts them at approximately 1.6 billion people. That's just a billion more than live in the United States. Statistically, Israel is a mere blip of a nation. And it is those numbers that empower Rouhani and may give life to his objective. Ultimately, of course, Rouhani wants the entire world to be under the leadership of Shiite Iran. Now, according to Rouhani's statement, quote, the global arrogance, which is his code for the United States and its allies, wants to create discord among Muslims. Unity is the only way to restore stability in the region. He continues, the Zionist regime, his code for Israel, is a regional base for America and the global arrogance. Disunity and discord among Muslims and terrorist groups in the region have diverted us from the important issue of Palestine. Several years ago, Iran sponsored protests to oust Sunni leadership in Bahrain. In response, the Saudis drove army brigades across a causeway they built to Bahrain. And with that military support, they secured the rule of the Bahraini royal family and saved them from being toppled by an Iranian-sponsored movement. While watching the protests, the Shia protesters held up signs critical of the Bahrain's Sunni leadership. One poignant placard read, "You treat the Jews better than you treat Shiites." There was and is still a very small Jewish community in Bahrain, that little Arab country, complete with a synagogue and a cemetery. The community even boasts both a member of the Bahrain parliament and a former ambassador. The former Bahraini ambassador to the United States was a Jew named Huda Nonu, who served from 2008 to 2013. She's also a woman. So yes, the Sunnis of Bahrain probably treat the Jews better than they treat the Shiites. Rouhani's dream to unite Muslim leadership and Muslims in general under the banner of Iran is a pipe dream. It will never happen. Iran is trying to use the Palestinian card as a fulcrum to leverage hatred against Israel and thereby unite Shiites and Sunni Muslims. The plan will not succeed. The centuries of hatred between the two sects are so palpable and so more powerful than their hatred of Israel and the West. Shiites murder Sunnis and Sunnis murder Shiites regularly. They even kill one another in the midst of prayer. Even on religious pilgrimage, they blow one another up. Shiites blow up Sunni mosques with Sunnis inside, and Sunnis blow up Shiite mosques, killing Shiites. They kill each other with impunity. Not long ago, I asked a Sunni Egyptian driver who picked me up at JFK Airport, who did he hate more, a Jew or a Shiite? He answered without missing a beat. He said, "That's a no-brainer. Of course I hate a Shiite more than a Jew. Of course I do." In the US, Brexit was a flash in the pan. Brexit was a complete and total non-issue until, that is, the day of the vote. US media only started covering Brexit on the day of the vote itself. And suddenly they couldn't get enough. Suddenly Brexit became a three-ring media-driven circus. It was turned into an economic crisis that will have lasting consequences, not just in England, but for economies as far away as China. It became an international diplomatic crisis with proportions unparalleled in history. Ex nihilo, the Brexit suddenly appeared and took over. To Israel's credit, by the way, Israeli media focused on Brexit for weeks prior to the vote, with commentary and analysis all around coverage. It was all, of course, seen through the narrow, self-centered prism of Israel. But there was coverage. The most important lesson to be gleaned from Brexit's story in the United States is that the media is driven by entertainment. Crisis pushes a story, and for the sake of the story, a non-event can be turned into a crisis. The United Kingdom composes about 4% of the world economy, a mere fraction of any other Western economy. Today, Great Britain is a has-been in the world economy. The attention that's being paid to her now is in deference to the lofty position that she held in her former role as a colonial empire that at one point exerted significant influence in the entire world. In 2016, the state of California has a larger GDP than England. England is the fifth or sixth largest economy in the world, but the kicker is that her economy is not even calculated in the EU numbers, not even a part of the EU. In the World Bank, the IMF, the UN calculations, all of them have GDP of Great Britain separate, as a separate entity from the EU itself. At this point, this defection by Great Britain from the European Union is hardly a chink in the EU's armor. So why the hype? Some outlets covered Brexit because other media outlets covered Brexit, and nobody wants to be left out. News coverage today is entertainment. It's focused on entertainment. It is based on the rule of thumb, if it bleeds, it leads. During the crisis, especially an economic crisis, the media becomes a lifeline that sustains and buoys people in their time of need. Markets may tank, and people may lose faith in foundations of their economy, but the media coverage remains constant. The media is the friend and neighbor you can depend on. In the US, even the weather is entertainment. So if there's a tiny chance of a snow 90 miles away, no matter how irrelevant a story it is, it will become a nail-biting headline news story. Everyone, it seems, loves a crisis. The Brexit vote was on the calendar. It was expected to be a close vote, and that alone warranted significant coverage in the United States for weeks leading up to the vote. But that's not what happened. Analysts, thinkers, editors all have a responsibility to keep it honest, and in this instance, they failed. This need for sensational, crisis-related coverage is the same perversion of the truth that drives Western coverage of Israel and the Middle East. It's a driving force that morphs and warps most coverage of Israel, especially coverage dealing with the Palestinians. Crisis, horror, and hype are what drive the coverage. It's true for the Middle East, it's true for mass murders, and it's true for Brexit. Whatever happens with Brexit, there is one thing I can safely say: it's not a crisis. Coming up, points of view. Here's what some important voices have been talking about. The first column I want to focus on, I want to do that again, I'm sorry. Here's what some important voices have been talking about. I want to focus on one topic and look at two columns, one from USA Today and one from the Washington Post. Both are published on July 4th, 2016. The columns are about Elie Wiesel. They approach him from very different points of view and are extremely illustrative of the greatness of Wiesel. Full disclosure, I knew Professor Wiesel. He was invited to our wedding, and I studied with him in graduate school. I saw him a few weeks before his death in shul, and he looked very good. He had a huge impact on me as a thinker, as a Jew, as a human being, and as a leader. As much as he was known for bringing the ideas of the Holocaust to light with his book Night, he was most proud of being a teacher. He taught ideas through stories. He was a philosopher and a teacher of philosophy. Often universities are filled with scholars of philosophy, critical thinkers and writers about philosophy. There was also a need for a real, genuine philosopher in the world of the academy, not just footnote specialists. Wiesel was a genuine philosopher. He dealt with the classic good versus evil. His greatest love as a teacher was teaching Chassidut. He loved the stories of the Rebbes and the literature of the grand Rebbes, the rabbis of rabbis, as he used to call them, especially Rabbi Nachman of Bratslav. Wiesel was not a simple man, and he was not a happy man. He was most content, though, when he was struggling with the teachings of the Rebbes and conveying their greatness. He was driven to explain them and to embrace the remarkable universalism of the lessons. This was the greatness of Wiesel and the greatness of Judaism. It was a blend of universal values of justice and righteousness and the particular values of the Jewish community. All of his work was a marriage of these ideas. One could not exist without the other. On the one hand, he was so Jewish, through and through, working for Jewish causes. On the other, his message resounded to all as a universal message. First up is a column by Reuven Taft, a past president of the Greater Sacramento Board of Rabbis. He's the rabbi and spiritual leader of Mosaic Law Congregation. It was published on July 4th, 2016 in USA Today. The column is entitled, Carry On Elie Wiesel's Fight Against Inhumanity. And the subheadline is, His Voice Was the Conscience of the World. This is how Rabbi Taft begins. When Raz Levi Weintraub informed me of the death of Elie Wiesel, at the conclusion of our Sabbath service on Saturday, my heart fluttered, and the shock of the news was devastating. How could this be? Elie Wiesel was dead? He was larger than life. For years, his voice was the conscience of the world. He was my role model, who spoke up against injustices. He was one of the few non-rabbis who was made an honorary member of the Rabbinical Assembly. Taft's observations were universal. Every Jewish leader around the world felt the same way. Every Jewish thinker felt the loss. Every Jew had to have felt that a great Jewish leader was no longer. Taft continued, while his own experiences suffering at the hands of the Nazis certainly impacted his passion to never allow the world to forget the horrors of the Holocaust, he became the spokesman to urge all of us not to allow such horrors to take place on our watch. He spoke out against genocides in Cambodia, Rwanda, Bosnia, and Darfur. The Nobel Peace Prize laureate was never afraid to challenge world leaders. I will never forget April 1985, when at the White House, Wiesel thanked President Reagan for awarding him the Congressional Medal of Achievement. Wiesel then implored Reagan not to go to Bitburg, Germany, where the president was scheduled to lay a wreath of flowers in a cemetery where 47 members of the Nazi SS were buried. That place, he told the president, is not your place. Your place is with the victims of the SS. He spoke truth to power. Every year during my 10th grade confirmation class, I spend one session with my students teaching them about Elie Wiesel and recounting for them his courageous words at the White House. Taft is correct. No doubt, That was one of the many moments that propelled Wiesel into the limelight to carry a message. In that way, Wiesel was much like the ancient biblical prophets. Taft concludes with a beautiful and typical story about Wiesel. It links his past with the present and his Jewish values with his humanity. Taft writes, "My last encounter with Elie Wiesel was in May 2002. I called his office at Boston University to ask whether he'd consider sending me a letter of condolence to the family of Helen Fishman Navi. Helen, a survivor of Auschwitz and a member of my congregation, grew up with Elie Wiesel in Sighet, Romania. Within a few minutes, there was a message from my secretary that Elie Wiesel was on the phone. He told me that he had already dictated a letter to fax to me. I thanked him for his kindness. He concluded his letter to the family saying, I knew Helen's family, the Fishmans. One of them was a cheder friend. Helen evoked him with melancholy. There was deep melancholy in her when she spoke and when she was silent. In a mysterious way, part of her remained in Sighet. Now, as she was about to leave this world and ascend to the world of eternal truth, she will tell the celestial tribunal the rest of the story, our story. May her memory be a blessing." And now Taft wishes Wiesel the very same blessing. It is so simple and so appropriate. And now Elie Wiesel has ascended from this earthly world to the heavenly one. And while no one will ever fill his shoes, let us all strive to carry on his legacy and the lessons he has taught us by never forgetting to stand against injustice and to ensure that future generations will never forget man's inhumanity to man. May his memory be forever a blessing. Second up is a column from the Washington Post. It's also published on July 4th, 2016. This column is entitled Elie Wiesel's Great Mission on Behalf of Soviet Jews. This column is by another great Jewish hero, Natan Sharansky. Like Wiesel, Sharansky should need no introduction. He is a human rights activist, a former political prisoner in the Soviet Union. He spent 9 years in Soviet prison. Today, Sharansky is the chairman of the Jewish Agency for Israel. Sharansky begins by laying the framework of the greatness of Wiesel. Sharansky writes, perhaps better than anyone else of our age, Elie Wiesel grasped the power of silence. He understood that the failure to speak out about both the horrors of the past and the evils of the present is one of the most effective ways to perpetuate suffering and empower those who inflict it. Good versus evil was one of Wiesel's dominant themes in his writing, in his essays, and in his thought and in his teaching. Standing up against evil and not being silent in the face of evil was essential to Wiesel. Sharansky continues, Wiesel therefore made it his life's mission to ensure that silence would not prevail. First, he took the courageous and painful step of recounting the Holocaust, bringing it to the public attention in a way that no one else before him had done. His harrowing chronicle, Night, originally titled And the World Remained Silent, forced readers to confront that most awful of human events, to remember it, to talk about it, to make it part of their daily lives. Then, as if it weren't enough, he turned his attention to the present, giving voice to the millions of Jews living behind the Iron Curtain. Although he is rightly hailed for the first of these two achievements, it was the second, he told me on several occasions, for which he most hoped to be remembered. Sharansky is using the theme of silence as a huge point, reminding us all that Wiesel's Night, which is one of the most read books in the world, especially because Oprah made it into one of her books, originally was titled, And the World Remained Silent. In other words, the world stood by as the Jews were being murdered. Sharansky now turns to the Soviet Jewry movement. He writes, Wiesel first traveled to the Soviet Union in 1965 as a journalist from Haaretz on a mission to meet with Jews there, and was shocked by what he saw. Those with whom he spoke were too afraid to recount Soviet persecution, terrified of reprisals from the regime. But their eyes implored him to tell the world about their plight. The book that resulted, The Jews of Silence, was an impassioned plea to Jews around the world to shed their indifference and to speak out for those who could not. For the second time in a single generation, we are committing the error of silence, Wiesel warned, a phenomenon even more troubling to him than the voiceless suffering of the Soviet Jews themselves. That book transformed almost anyone who read it. The Jews of Silence was a book so powerful that literally delivered activists to the cause. It was the Soviet Jewry Handbook. Now Sharansky follows through with the marriage of the Jewish particular and the universal issues of Wiesel's teachings. Sharansky writes, Elie Wiesel's humanism, his active concern for the voiceless, hardly stopped with fellow Jews. He spoke out against massacres in Bosnia, Cambodia, Sudan, against the apartheid in South Africa, and against the burning of black churches in the United States. He became, as others have said, the conscience of the world. Yet he never gave up or sacrificed a bit of his concern for the Jewish people. He did not feel that he had to give up his Jewish loyalty or national pride to be a better spokesman for others. To the contrary, it was the tragedy of his people that generated his concern for the world, a world he felt God had abandoned. And it was his belief in universal ideas that helped him to ultimately reconcile with his Jewish God. May his memory be a blessing. We can speak for hours about Wiesel and just touch the surface. Yehi Zichro Baruch. May his memory be blessed. Coming up, commentary through cartoons, where pictures tell the story. Today, I just want to deal with one cartoon. The artist is an Israeli of Russian extraction. He lives in Haifa, and his name is Vladik Sandler. This is a sad and funny portrayal of the current terror in Israel. Sandler is making fun of the fact that supporters of the terror embrace terrorists who kill innocent people. This cartoon was published on his Facebook page on July 2nd, 2016. There are 3 panels in the cartoon. The top has a boy, a terrorist wannabe, proclaiming that he will be a hero. The cartoon is in Hebrew. The caption reads, "The day will come when I will also be a great hero, and I will work to save the Palestinian people." The next panel has a young girl asking, "And then will you fight against armed soldiers?" The boy then says, "No way. I will stab children in their sleep and old ladies or pregnant women." This is just so true. And unfortunately, most people are blind to this reality. In a moment, my own perspective and a few predictions. Reuters released a sneak preview of an interview with Syrian leader Bashar Assad, broadcast on the Australian SBS News channel. The quotes were very damning of the Western world. Assad is quoted as saying that Western countries condemn his government politically and then send security advisors to help fight ISIS and al-Qaeda. He also gave a big dig to the United States, saying that Western countries simply mimic what the U.S. wants them to say. One of the important revelations in the interview is that Assad tells the Australian media that their country, Australia, is among those countries that show their duplicity. They attack us politically, and then they send officials to deal with us under the table, especially the security, including your government. They don't want to upset the United States. Actually, most of Western officials, they only repeat what the United States want them to say. This is the reality. It is befitting that Assad sees the world through his own unique lens. Before becoming a ruthless dictator, he was, after all, a card-carrying MD, a licensed eye surgeon. Iran is elated about the Brexit vote. The Iranians claim that they believe in democratic voting, and so they supported the vote about leaving the EU. The Iranian Foreign Ministry's statement read, "As a democratic establishment, the Islamic Republic of Iran respects the British people's vote on leaving the European Union and considers that as being in line with the will of the majority of the country's people to adopt their own foreign policy." It sounds good, but it's totally irrelevant. The real reason Iran supports Brexit is because the United States was in favor of remaining in. In addition, the Iranians perceive England to be a huge trading partner, and they want to expand their trade with Iran, which they can now do without EU restrictions. Every country has an agenda. Iran is no exception. Israel will lease 5 drones to Germany in a deal worth 600 million euros. This is fascinating for 2 important reasons. The first is that Germany did not lease or buy U.S. drones, but chose Israel drones instead. After all, the U.S. makes the Predator and the Raptor drone as part of the United States' highly developed weapons cache. Israel has a wide range of drones, and they're leaders in the technology in the field. The Germans are leasing the Eitan, which is also known as the Heron TP. It's huge. It weighs over 5 tons, wingspan of 86 feet, and it's 43 feet long. The Eitan can carry 4,000 pounds of equipment, read bombs, because that leads us to a very interesting second dimension of the deal. The Germans said that the Heron can carry and shoot missiles, rockets, and bombs. The Germans used an older version of this drone to attack in Afghanistan. But the Germans were actually revealing a hidden secret. Israel has never admitted that they make drones that can be armed with weapons. The Germans just disclosed that very important piece of information. Muslim soldiers were recently sworn into the IDF. Most of the soldiers are Bedouins. They're sworn into the Desert Corps. They'll probably be trackers, a task Bedouins have traditionally excelled in for decades. These Muslim soldiers swore their allegiance to defend the state of Israel. Each received a weapon and a Quran. The ceremony took place at the Memorial for Fallen Bedouin Soldiers in the Negev Desert in the southern part of Israel. Israel wants and needs Bedouin input in the IDF and in Israeli society. We've been thinking out loud about a lot today. Now that you know what I've been thinking, let me know what you're thinking. Email me at micah@jbstv.org. Tweet me at Micah Halpern. Tell me what you think. Before we end, let me leave you with one piquant piece of information. Did you know that there are two different Talmudic quotes about a person who saves a single life and therefore saves the world? The Mishnah in Sanhedrin 4:5 states that a person who saves a single person is as if he saved the world. And then the same quote in the Mishnah, as found in the Gemara on page 37a, states that he who saves a single person of Israel, Mi Yisrael, in other words, a Jew, is as if they saved the entire world. This is indeed part of the overlapping tension between the particular and the insular, internal issues of the Jewish community, and the universal issues, the importance of helping the world. There is a healthy and essential internal tension within Judaism that prioritizes the inner circle, while at the same time requires Jews to be guardians of the world. As my teacher, Elie Wiesel, said, the opposite of life is not death, it is indifference. Thank you for thinking out loud with me, Micah Halpern. Let's think out loud again next week on JBS.
We would be pleased to send a complimentary DVD of this program to anyone who wishes to support JBS, the Jewish Broadcasting Service, with a tax-deductible gift of $36, double chai or more, to the nonprofit organization Jewish Education in Media. Simply visit the JBS homepage and click on the Donate button to make a donation by PayPal or your credit card. And please indicate the program for which you would like a DVD. Or you can send your tax-deductible check made out to Jem, Post Office Box 180, Riverdale Station, Bronx, New York 10471. And again, please remember to indicate which program you would like to receive with our compliments. And we thank you for your kind support.